Good afternoon and welcome to another in our series of space-time interviews sponsored by the National Security Space Association. As many of you know, NSSA is the only association devoted solely to the U.S. national security space enterprise, both government and private sector. My name is Chris Williams and I serve as chair of the Studies Analysis Center within the association. It's a great honor to welcome our guest today, General John Hyten, the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Sir, thank you so much for taking time from your busy schedule to be with us today, especially with the newly confirmed Secretary of Defense in the building. Prior to becoming the 11th Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Hyten served as Commander of United States Strategic Command. During his illustrious career, he served in a series of important military space positions, including Vice Commander and then Commander of Air Force Space Command, and numerous space-related acquisition and operational positions. It's exciting to see a space warrior rise to such heights in the military establishment. We will follow our standard format for this interview. I will turn to General Hyten for whatever opening remarks he wishes to make, then we will have an opportunity for some questions and answers. If you have a question for General Hyten, please use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. I can't guarantee that I'll be able to get to all of your questions, but I'll certainly try to cover some of them. As we approach the end of our session, I'll again turn the floor over to General Hyten for any concluding remarks he wishes to make, then adjourn the proceedings. With that, General Hyten, it's great to see you again, sir, and thanks so much for your time. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks very much, everybody, for joining us. Thanks to the NSSA for hosting this and for what you do, and actually for giving me the opportunity to talk about space. I actually don't get to talk about space nearly as much as I used to. It is one of my favorite things to talk about, maybe my favorite thing to talk about. So it's nice to be able to take a step back in a very, very busy schedule and talk about it. So I'm going to start today just with a couple of questions and answers, since that's what we're going to transition to in a little while. And I'll just get these questions out of the way because they're questions I get a lot lately. So I figured I'd just go ahead and ask myself and then answer them. So question number one, how is my job this week compared to last week? The interesting thing is I got a couple new bosses. I have a new commander-in-chief. I have a new Secretary of Defense. That Secretary of Defense was confirmed 2 hours ago, and he is now hard at work in the Pentagon, and he's going after it. And we'll be meeting with him today, tomorrow, all the things that come along with the new Secretary of Defense. So Secretary Austin is fully on board. But the interesting thing from my perspective, and I hope for everybody's perspective, is my job didn't change. My oath didn't change. I swear to support and defend the Constitution. I did that last week. I did that this week. It's the same structure. We swear to follow the lawful order of our commander-in-chief and the orders of the civilian leadership over us. We do that every day when we come to work. It really doesn't change. And so some people think the decisions that I have to make are actually very difficult because the Constitution pretty much tells us what we're doing. The decisions are actually easy. Maybe the implementation is difficult, maybe the challenges are difficult around, but the decisions themselves are pretty straightforward. So my job hasn't changed from last week to this week, and it won't change next week. It's always the same, and I love that about my chosen profession. It allows you to kind of ground yourself and make sure you always understand what's really important.
Thank you for your service, sir.
Thanks, Chris. And the second one I've been getting a lot lately is, so what's going to happen with the Space Force and the new administration? I get that all the time. I get that on emails from friends. I get that on phone calls. All friends that call me, they ask me that question. And I haven't had a conversation with the new president and the new Secretary of Defense about it. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen to it, but I think it's important to actually go back and talk a little bit about the history of the Space Force, because some of the history is well, I don't say lost, but it's not visible in public that much, and it's worth spending a few minutes talking about it, because there's no doubt that President Trump and Vice President Pence, when they were in office, they absolutely supported the creation of the Space Force and making it a reality. And they were huge supporters of it, and huge, people that pushed it across the finish line. But the creation of the idea, and I was there the first time it came up, and I was in a small room in the Capitol, and it was with two congressmen. It was with Congressman Mike Rogers and Congressman Jim Cooper, Congressman Rogers from Alabama, Congressman Cooper from Tennessee, a Republican and a Democrat. At that time, the chairman of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, the House Armed Services Committee, and the ranking member. They would switch as the elections went on, because this was about 2016. And we're talking about how space should be organized in the military, because you can go back all the way to the 80s and see that Congress has taken national security space very seriously all the way through. And as we're sitting around having that conversation in a vault in the Capitol, the concept of a Space Corps came up. And what would it look like? How would those things work? And really, Congressman Rogers, Chairman Rogers at the time, and Ranking Member Cooper, Congressman Cooper, they grabbed onto that idea and began to work with it in a bipartisan nature across the entire Congress. And the first time it was voted on out of the entire Armed Services Committee in the House, the vote was 60-1 to create that kind of structure. As it bounced around, as it morphed around, it transitioned to the Space Force. I remember Congressman Cooper was asked in public one time what the difference was between the Space Force and the Space Corps. And he answered it very shortly and very succinctly, and he said one word: force versus corps. Because the structure that we came up with was the structure that the Armed Services Committee of the House of Representatives created with the leadership of Congressman Rogers, Congressman Cooper, Congressman Lamborn, bipartisan nature across the aisle to create the thing because of the need to respond to the threats that we're facing in space. And it drove us to that structure. So it was a bipartisan, and it came to Congress to create it, it was a bipartisan support that created the environment. So I think that the Space Force is in solid ground. They've done an amazing work in this first year, creating the structure that they need to have to support Space Command and all the other combatant commands to make sure they are providing the right kind of trained personnel and trained ready forces, the right kind of equipment to deal with the threats of the future. But it's important to remember it's all about the threat. So what's going to happen to the Space Force in the next year? I can't tell you. I show up to work as the vice chairman every day, and I give my best military advice. I'll continue to do that. But I can tell you that one thing I do know is that this is a bipartisan issue with support from both parties. And it's supported because the threat is out there and we have to respond immediately to the threat that's there. That's also why we have a National Security Space Association that stood up to remember that we need to continue to push those issues. So we'll continue to push through it. But the bottom line, and I told this in that room that day to both Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Cooper, as we got to remember as we go through all this, it's all about the threat. It's not about the uniform. It's not about the flag. It's not about the hat or the song. It's about the threat. And the structure they created is very streamlined under the Department of the Air Force. So it's a small number of people that are focused on dealing with the threat. And the threat issue goes back for decades, because this threat issue goes all the way back into the Cold War with the Soviet Union. One of my favorite quotes of all time, and I've said it in many speeches, and you've probably heard me say it, is General Bernard Schriever, February 1957, "Our safety as a nation may depend on our achieving space superiority. Space superiority may be more important than air superiority in the battles of the future." And that's so amazing to me when I think about those words, because that's February of 1957. It's 8 months before Sputnik, when the space catalog total population was 0, when nothing was in space except the heavens. And he looked out and he saw the future, and it was based on the threat that he saw coming at that time from the Soviet Union. Now we have strategic competitors, Russia and China in particular, that are building capabilities to challenge us in space, because if they can challenge us in space, they understand, as dependent as we are on space capabilities, they can challenge us as a nation. And therefore, it is our responsibility as military officers and our responsibility as leaders of the defense enterprise to make sure that we continue to educate the population about the threats that we face, and then put forth recommendations to deal with those threats in a rapid, responsive way to make sure that we can maintain the capabilities we have in space in any kind of conflict and any kind of challenges in the future, because it's critical to everything that we do. And I've been lucky enough to be involved in the space business since the very beginning of the military space program. I mean, when I joined the Air Force in 1981, there was no such thing as Space Command. There was no space organization within the entire military. So I became an engineer in communications command, and Space Command was formed in the Air Force in '82, and then a unified Space Command in '85, and then that went away in 2002. I always wish that didn't happen. That was recreated here a year and a half ago. That was one of the most important things, because we need a command where we have a 4-star general, Jim Dickinson at this time, from the United States Army, who's focused totally on space all the time and focused on those threats and making sure that we are properly dealing with the challenge that we face across the board. So it's all about the threat. I think it's important that we all remember that. If there weren't threats out there, we wouldn't be really even having this conversation. But we do have threats. Threats from China, threats from Russia. Russia recently tested another ASAT capability. China has tested it for over a decade. They're building capabilities to deny us space capabilities. They're building capabilities to use space against us. We have to be able to respond to that. It's just a nature of a competition, and that's the competition that we're in right now. So how do things change in a new administration? That's up to the civilian leadership to decide. But what doesn't change is the threat. The threat is out there, and we have to figure out how to deal with it. And it's our job as military officers, the chairman and mine as the principal military advisors, to give advice to our civilian leadership, and we'll do that. And we'll move forward in a way that effectively deals with the threat. One of the challenges that I implied as I went through that discussion pretty quickly is the threat is moving unbelievably fast. And that is a challenge for us, because if you look at our capabilities over the last few decades, and I've been involved with the development of most of them, the one thing that you can say about the development of all those capabilities is none of them went fast. We're just now relearning the ability to go fast, as you know, General Schriever lived through when he was building the first spy satellite, when he was building the first ICBM. It's always amazing to go back at that history, and you realize that Corona failed 13 times in a row. And the Minuteman system under General Schriever and the leadership that was there somehow figured out how to move fast and build a Minuteman ICBM from 0 to 800 in the field in 5 years, and to build a new spy satellite that changed reconnaissance forever, changed the entire rule structure of the world forever, and they did that fast. Another great quote from General Schriever, he said, "We never lost confidence, even when we had failures, which we had plenty of in the early days. Not a single program missed its target date of reaching operational capability." Of course, there were concerns, but we met them every time. Can you think of any recent space program that met its target date of operational capability? We're always delayed. We're always slow. It's always hard to come up with. And so one of the priorities I have as vice chairman is that every process that I'm involved in, and one of the cool parts about being vice chairman, and there's not that many, but one of the cool parts is I get to sit at the table, at the head of the table in many cases, on just about every board and panel that impacts the United States military. I sit at the head of the table for the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, the JROC. I sit at the head of the table with the Deputy Secretary of Defense and the DMAG for budget. I sit at acquisition boards for acquisition. I sit really involved in every tank for every operational decision that we make. So all the critical elements, I sit at the table. And so what I'm trying to do is everything that I'm involved in figure out how to put speed back into our processes. And the one thing I know, in order to have speed, you have to do what General Schriever does, and that is delegate capabilities to people that can do it. And, you know, Sam Phillips, Colonel Sam Phillips, when he started the Minuteman program, Brigadier General Sam Phillips, when he finished the Minuteman program, 4-star General Sam Phillips, when he actually commanded Systems Command back in the day. And in that period in between, Sam Phillips was given over to NASA to run the Apollo program as the program manager for Apollo. And General Schriever always said, when I did that, I lost my right arm, because I could give Sam Phillips any program and he delivered on time, on budget, every time. But NASA needed somebody like him. So Sam Phillips went over. So you look at all those great pictures, all those space history pictures, and you see von Braun and James Webb and everybody. And in those pictures, if you look close, Sam Phillips is always sitting right there. Usually a little bit in the background, a little bit to the side, because he didn't like the credit. But if you talk to General Schriever, which I thank my lucky stars I was able to do a few times in my life, he would tell the story of Sam Phillips that would just blow you away, because people like that get things done. So we got to figure out how to find the next Sam Phillips and give them the authority and responsibility, give them the budget, allow them to make the hard decisions. And oh, by the way, if they don't make it, we'll fire them and find somebody else. And actually, everybody I know that wears a uniform has no problem with that. If you succeed, we'll keep moving forward. If we fail, find somebody else. This is not about anything but making sure that our country is defended. And that's what we have to remember to do as we go forward. So figuring out how to go fast. So we're going to do things inside the JROC. We're building a joint warfighting concept in the Joint Staff with our partners in the Office of Secretary of Defense that will define a new way of doing business in the future. And space is going to be embedded in everything that we do. There's 4 critical supporting concepts underneath. Global fires, space is critical in that. Contested logistics, space is critical in that. Joint all-domain command and control, information advantage. Space is critical in everything that we do. So we have to figure out how to actually define joint requirements, which we've never really done effectively. We always validate service requirements, but we have to define the joint requirements of the future and then hold the services, and the Space Force being one of those services, accountable for meeting those capabilities as we go forward. And we're going to figure out how to do that. We're going to define those joint requirements. We're going to work with our partners upstairs to develop the strategy. Our job is not to develop the policy of the United States. That's the job of civilian leadership. Our job is to give advice in the development of that policy and then execute that policy. But when you have a threat that is so visible and so obvious, in some cases it makes your job pretty straightforward and pretty easy. You have to figure out how to respond to it. So we're going to come up with the requirements. We're going to work with all the services to figure out how to drive the joint force. Space is going to be a fun part of that. We have to make sure we continue to fund the capabilities that are out there. And whatever the structure is that we plug into, we're going to figure out a way to deal with the threat. So let me just say, I know there's many people online from the Space Force. You're guardians now. You know, if you're in the Air Force, you're an airman or you're a guardian. That's pretty straightforward. I kind of like that. I like that more than space professionals. Space professionals just doesn't quite roll off the tongue. So for the guardians that are out there on the screen, thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for keeping the watch. Thanks for preparing for the future. And oh, by the way, this is an unbelievably exciting time to be in this business. I can't, you know, I always joke that, you know, 4 stars they have 2 things in common. Number 1, we're all old and about done. And number 2, we all wish we could go back and do it all again. And boy, would this be an exciting time to be an airman, a guardian, a second lieutenant, whatever the rank structure they come up with. Wouldn't it be an exciting time to go back to the very beginning and be able to enter into this structure that's trying to figure out the future? Now, we still have bureaucracy we have to get through, but we have to continue to fight that. So General Raymond is doing a great job of leading the Space Force as the Chief of Space Operations. He has an amazing team of generals that are working with him. General Jim Dickinson is doing an amazing job in Colorado Springs, leading the new Unified Space Command. He's got John Shaw, an amazing group of generals and admirals supporting him. The leadership team that's out there right now is really doing a great job of moving things forward. And we just have to make sure we don't just keep up that pace, but we accelerate because our adversaries are accelerating. So Chris, that's about 20 minutes. I'll stop there. I'll turn it back to you and we'll start into questions and answers. Thanks for the time today.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your opening comments. Very enlightening. You touched a lot on the importance of the threat, and I wanted to draw you out a little bit on that issue. Both Russia and China are developing ASAT capabilities against critical U.S. intelligence gathering satellites, missile warning and attack assessment systems, and protected satellite communication systems. Those systems are critical to the president's ability to understand we and our allies are under attack and make timely and informed decisions on how to respond to such an attack and ensure those orders are effectively transmitted and received. What do these programs and activities say about Moscow's and Beijing's crisis or wartime intentions and how they view strategic stability as it's viewed in the West? Should we assume that space-based intelligence gathering, missile warning, and strategic communication systems are now fair game to be attacked in a crisis or wartime? And then secondly, how do current US plans address this growing threat? Are we on the right track to be able to operate through attacks like this?
So I guess you want me to spend the next 38 minutes on that, because that's about as broad a question as you can come up with. But I tell you what, when you look at what Russia and China are doing, they're doing in space the same thing they're doing in all other domains. I think it's always dangerous when you set aside the space domain and you look at that as, well, this is special, and therefore we need to treat it special. And we have to figure out what are they trying to do that's different in the special place than they're, no, if you look at what they're trying to do in air, land, sea, cyber, they're doing the same thing. They have a desire to challenge the United States in all domains. In order to challenge the United States in all domains, you have to do a few things. Number one, you want to have your own freedom of maneuver. You want to be able to take away our freedom of maneuver. You want to be able to deny your adversary access to that domain in times of conflict, should those conflicts ever happen. So what they're doing in space is no different than what they're doing in all other domains. It's just that space is new. It's new in many people's view, but in reality, it's not a new problem. This problem was a problem in the Cold War when the Soviet Union built their co-orbital ASAT system to challenge our capabilities back in the day. We addressed this threat in different treaties with the Soviet Union. Those treaties, like the ABM Treaty, are now gone. That talked about our missile warning capabilities and other capabilities, but we still look at those as very important capabilities to us to be able to operate through and understand what a strategic threat would be. But nonetheless, what Russia and China are doing are no different than what they're doing in all those domains. Therefore, what do we have to do to respond? That's the second part of your question. What do we have to do to respond? We have to do the same thing we do in all other domains. Again, you get trapped into, well, space is special, so we actually don't want to do what we do in other no. If you're being challenged in the space domain, just like you're challenged in air, land, and sea, then you better figure out how to defend yourself, how to build a more resilient architecture so you're not threatened as much, so you can fight through any threat effectively. You have to be able to figure out how to deny the adversary access to that domain if you ever have to. You have to go through all those other pieces. But I think the one summary answer to the question is you don't treat it special. Treat it like all other domains that we use for warfighting, and make sure that we look at it from a threat perspective or response perspective. And this is going to go back and forth. But I can guarantee you the other side of the United States Air Force from space is worried about the Chinese and Russian Air Forces. And our Navy is worried about the Chinese and Russian Navy. And they're building capabilities to respond to all those capabilities that are being built there. So is our Army. Why is it such a special thing to discuss our Space Force's ability to respond to threats in space? It's, you know, it always strikes me as we haven't quite reached the point where space is really normalized as a warfighting domain yet, because that question, which is a valid question, but it keeps coming up, and the answer is actually quite simple. It's because adversaries challenge us in all domains where we operate, period.
Right, understand, thank you. Former Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, Will Roper, stated, quote, "We need to break out of the paradigm of cost, schedule, and performance and move instead to adaptability and agility." Do you agree with that assessment? And if so, what new metrics should be used to drive acquisition of new space capabilities? And also, you've spoken of the need to hold the services accountable as they acquire new space capabilities. Are there examples that demonstrate how such accountability can be achieved in practice?
So again, multi-part question, you're killing me.
Yes, sir, sorry.
That's all right. So the first part of the question is, when you look at Will Roper's quote, I agree with the last part. I don't agree with the first part. You actually have to lump all those together. You want agility in all your programs. You want adaptability in all your programs, but you still have to measure cost, schedule, and performance. You can't ignore cost, schedule, and performance because you have an agile, adaptable, unaffordable program. So you have to make sure that you understand cost, schedule, and performance, but it can't be your only metrics. Because when it becomes the only metric, what really happens is you try to make sure you remove all risk from the program. When you remove all risk from program, you drive enormous cost and schedule impacts into that program. You want to build agile programs that can quickly adapt and respond to the threats that present themselves. And that's exactly what's happening right now. So you have to build that in, but you still have to pay for it. So you better understand what it's going to cost, how are you going to pay for it, those kind of things. But from my perspective, what you want to do is you want to push the authorities down more to allow program directors and program managers the ability to quickly respond to changing threats. If I think about the space threats from China, for example, and without getting into any classified discussions, I'll just say that they've changed significantly multiple times over the last decade because they're moving unbelievably fast. And so if we started a program 10 years ago and we were basing against the threat that existed 10 years ago, by definition, it's not the right answer to the threat that exists today. So what do we have to do? We have to say, okay, here's the program director, you're building a capability, you have to adapt to the new threat, and you have to do it in the cost structure that you have right now. I remember talking to, a lot of the folks that worked with General Schriever. Dr. Johnny Foster is one of my heroes. He came to a meeting I was at one time when I was at Stratcom, and why he came, I don't know. He was 94 at the time, and it always bothers me that he's 94 and he was still the smartest person in the room. And that includes me because he's just way smarter than me. But, all of a sudden, as I was talking about our challenges of moving fast, I realized that Dr. Foster was DDR&E, the Deputy Director for Research and Engineering, back when General Schriever was moving fast, and when Hyman Rickover was moving fast in the Navy, building the nuclear Navy. And the stories on both sides of those are pretty incredible. So I asked Dr. Foster, how the heck did you manage General Schriever and Admiral Rickover? And he laughed and he said, actually, it wasn't that hard. Every month I'd pick up the phone and I'd call Hyman or I'd call Benny and I'd say, hey, how's everything going? And we'd talk for a while and I'd say, so you need any help? And they'd say, nope, I don't need any help. Everything's good. And so I'd hang up the phone and I'd wait. Next month I'd call and I'm asked the same question. They said, yep, I actually need help I got a problem because this is happening. So I need some more funding. I need some more help with Congress. I need help with, and he would go, oh, now I got something to do. I go work that issue. I worked that issue off. I call him back and said, okay, I got that issue worked. Anything else? Nope, I'm good. And they gave them room to maneuver, room to respond to a threat that was changing just unbelievably fast. And that kind of oversight is critical. That kind of support is critical from the Pentagon. In many cases, we forgot that kind of structure. So pushing that authority down, giving people that authority to go fast and adapt and respond agility to the threats that change is critical, but you can't ignore cost, schedule, and performance because you can't buy anything without it.
Right. Also on threats, we all know of the SolarWinds breaches and various other supply chain and cyber breaches. In the acquisition of national security space systems or other systems for that matter, who ultimately is responsible for assuring that those capabilities will be resilient in the face of increasingly sophisticated threats? Is it the requirement setters, the JROC, for example? Is it the acquisition community? Is it the operators or someone else? Who has the power to say no to an acquisition if robust cyber security and supply chain security are not included in the plan for that system?
So the quick answer is all of the above, but I won't just leave it there. I'll explain that because I think the explanation's important to understand that piece. First, from a requirements perspective, and I tell you what, when I was at Space Command as the director of requirements a long time ago as a 1-star, I screwed this up. I screwed it up in OCX. So, you know, I've in public, you know, beat up Raytheon in the past for their performance in OCX, and that has been not a good program in terms of the development, but I also have to look myself in the mirror and realize that I created part of that problem in the requirement structure I defined back in the middle part of the last decade, because what we did, and we didn't know any better at the time, is we basically put a requirement in that told the contractor, which ended up being Raytheon, that your job is to build the perfect cyber secure weapon system that nobody can ever break into. And when you give somebody that requirement and then make them test and prove it, it's an unprovable requirement because somebody can always get into the net. An insider can always get in somewhere, somehow you can always get in there. So the real issue is you have to be able to build a very resilient, structured defensive system. And then you have to be able to actively monitor it and actively respond to threats when you see them. That's the structure that you have to have today. That's why it's a multi-part solution. So the requirements have to be flexible in that way. They can't be fixed like I described for OCX. Then the acquisition community is responsible for building and delivering to that, and they have to be able to watch the industrial base and make sure they do that. And then ultimately the operators, with Cyber Command as the lead, is responsible for making sure that we have the ability to monitor and respond when threats do materialize. And actually, that tri-headed monster, or whatever you want to call it right now, is actually working pretty well together. So under Deputy Secretary Norquist, who is back to being Deputy Secretary, he was acting Secretary for a couple of days, but he's back to Deputy Secretary right now. And he will be until Dr. Hicks is confirmed here in a little while. He set up a structure where we came together and we came up with, in the classified world, 4 pilots where Cyber Command, the acquisition community, and the joint staff are working together to figure out how best to defend the entire enterprise start to finish. And we've made great progress, but great progress comes with breakage too. We've done stuff that just didn't flat out work. And we've done stuff that were actually, in retrospect, kind of stupid. But we're trying to do what General Schriever said. Failures are okay if you learn from them and you move quickly forward. And Deputy Norquist has given us enough rope where we can move fast. So General Nakasone is fully involved. It was Secretary Lord, now it's Acting Secretary Cummings. And General Nakasone and I were all in on trying to figure out the right roles and responsibilities and how to do this and establish this as policy across the board. So this is a hard problem, but it's not a problem that can be solved by just a flat out statement of requirement. Build me a perfect cyber defensive capability that nobody can ever hack. That just doesn't work.
Yes, sir. Speaking of hard problems, I'm going to throw another one at you here. Various proponents of different architectural designs, whether it's, let's say, disaggregation or proliferated LEO systems, cite these approaches as the solution to foreign threats to U.S. space systems. Do you agree that no single architectural approach provides the ultimate solution, and instead, Is the optimal approach for assuring the resilience of U.S. space assets one of layered defenses, just as we have in other cases? That is, an adoption of a broad range of passive and active features and measures that challenge adversary tactics and reduce our vulnerability to any single method of attack?
Yes, layered defense is the only approach. You know, if you create, say, if P-LEO, proliferated LEO, is the solution to all your problems, you put everything in proliferated LEO, you just created another indefensible structure. Because without going into any details, I can figure out a way, if that's the only capability I have to worry about, that I can defeat proliferated LEO. It's not that hard. But if I'm in LEO, MEO, GEO, other orbits, non-traditional orbits, and I'm looking different depending on the adversary, and then I have a defensive posture, that layered defense is the right way to build things. So you need to build multiple solutions to the problem. You need to investigate what is the best place to be, but having a layered defense and a layered structure and a more robust, resilient architecture is absolutely the way to go. It's the way everybody else does it. And again, it's just normalizing space, just like all other domains. Even the Navy, which is what? Just one domain, right? Maritime. No, if you look at the Navy, it's underwater, surface, and air that they have to have in order to effectively control the maritime domain. No different in space. You have to be able to operate everywhere all the time, make the problem difficult on your adversaries, and then be able to defend where you have to defend. You can't defend everywhere all the time. You have to defend where you have to defend.
In your opinion, sir, does the department today fully leverage all available commercial space capabilities? If not, what stands in the way of expanded use of commercial space systems for U.S. national security? Is it policy, acquisition rules, regulations, lack of requirements, a culture mindset? And are there some specific areas where commercial space systems can be more effectively leveraged for the benefit of U.S. national security?
So that's been a frustrating question for me. It really has, because it's sitting right there. And the only people that are in our way of taking advantage of it are us. There's nobody else. Look at the launch business. The whole concept of SpaceX and Blue Origin and the transformation of the United Launch Alliance was built because of many partners and a more commercial model going forward. And it was hugely successful. Now we have capabilities, SpaceX, Planet, others that are going into the space business from the commercial side. We should be partnered with everybody that is operating in space. If they want to partner us, we should figure out how to come up with the resources and partner with them. It's hugely beneficial because space is still expensive. Doesn't matter who you are. It's still an expensive enterprise. And if you can partner with others in sharing the cost, it's to everybody's benefit. NASA really funded a lot of SpaceX early on. Then we funded SpaceX. Then the commercial side came in and funded SpaceX. Now you have this commercial, NASA, civil, military partnership with the entire U.S. commercial launch business that has driven costs down, capabilities up, and provided huge benefits to this nation. Think about where the launch business was in 2007, when we basically had to create United Launch Alliance because the launch business was about dead in the United States of America. It was about gone. All of the commercial business had gone overseas, to Europe, to China, to Russia. Now, our commercial sector in launch is the majority of the business. People come to the United States again, and that's hugely beneficial for the department. The same structure is taking place in the commercial sector and satellites right now, and we need to figure out how to take advantage of it. Now, there's things that are right there right now. Communications and imagery, right up front, that we need to be partnering and taking advantage of. I think that the recent decision, which was an obvious decision, I think, to make the Space Force the 18th member of the intelligence community, just offers that opportunity to look at how we do commercial imagery in a different way. We need to partner with the
Space
National
domain
Reconnaissance
awareness
Office.
as well, for example, space domain awareness is another example.
Space domain awareness, exactly. So all of those things are sitting right there for us to take advantage of. You know, I'm going to retire on November 21st. It's in the law. It's not a choice. It's just the law. And I'm going to go like crazy for the next 10 months to push for us to continue to improve, taking advantage of the partnerships that are out there in the commercial sector, and there are many. And I think we've been making progress. It's one of those things, if you take a short-term view of success, you'll always be disappointed. But if you look at a long-term view, where we were 10 years ago, where we were 5 years ago, we've made enormous progress. So we just need to pick up the speed a little bit, like we do in many things, and be smart about what we do and what the commercial sector can provide us and what they can't, because they can't do everything, but they can do a lot.
Yes, sir. You mentioned the intelligence community. Space Policy Directive 4 called for closer integration between DoD and the intelligence community on a broad range of national security space matters. Could you talk a little bit about the progress that's been made in this area since the policy directive was issued, and some of the outstanding issues, some of the work that remains to be done in this area?
So we started down that path before the policy directive was issued. The policy directive kind of formalized what we all knew we had to do. But I remember sitting across the table with my good friend Betty Sapp and saying, hey, we're just going to make this happen. This was before the policy directive was written. We knew we had to do that. When General Raymond came in, he continued it. He continued when Betty left and Chris Scalise came in. Chris Scalise is working effectively with General Dickinson and General Raymond and figuring out how to do that. The partnership with the intelligence community is better now than I've ever seen it. And I've been in this business 35 years, roughly. And it's better than I've ever seen it. We understand on both sides the threat, and we understand our roles and responsibilities in dealing with that threat, and how to take advantage of the strengths that each bring to the problem, and how, if we ever get into a scrape, we have to have certain authorities and the ability to move quickly. And I tell you, the National Reconnaissance Office, but all the three-letter agencies have been great partners in moving the ball forward. And I don't see that changing, no matter who is the chief of space operations, who is the commander of Space Command, and who comes in, just because I think it is culturally just part of who we are now, and we're just moving that forward.
Yes, sir. We have a question from a member of our audience, a member of the press. Thank you, General Hyten, for being here today. Can you speak to why the completion of the joint warfighting concept has been delayed until spring, and speak to how space plays into information advantage besides JADC2? So
the why it's been delayed, there's an easy one-word answer. It's COVID. It's more complicated than that, but let me start with COVID. In order for a new joint warfighting concept to actually reach the first level of maturity where we can publish version 1, we really need to play some large war games with all the services playing, including the Space Force, and in a very active red team that plays real time and looks at the different concepts and figured out what works and doesn't work. And we're by this time, we're supposed to already have done 3 major war games and a globally integrated exercise, and we've only done one of them, and the one was less than satisfactory because of all the restrictions we had to put in place for COVID. And so we were really driving to get something published by the end of the year. But when we got to November, we really looked at it and said, you know, we really need to take the time. So we're going to make sure we continue to exercise it, war game it, drive it out, publish in the spring. And the other thing we're going to publish in the spring is a requirements document for the 4 supporting concepts coming out of it that will drive the joint force in building that. And that gets after the second part of your question, which is how does information advantage interface with JADC2? When you read the requirements documents, you'll understand. So I had that question early on, and in fact, one of my original challenges to the team was, explain why information advantage just isn't embedded in everything that we do and is actually a separate construct. Because to me, when I was looking at it, it's really embedded in JADC2, embedded in contested logistics, embedded in global fires, and key to the entire joint warfighting concept. So why do you have to have, but if you look at what we have to do with information, what we have to do managing data, what we have to do in developing software, what do we have to do in terms of all those pieces, if you don't have a place that is actually focusing on the critical elements that enable the information advantage, you'll lose it as the overarching pieces of the puzzle. So what you'll see coming out of the information advantage is these overarching things that drive everything that we do. Command and control will focus on that element, logistics on that element, fires on that element. The warfighting concept will integrate it together, but you had to have somebody that says, what do we actually have to do that will enable the joint force rapidly to build this information advantage across everything that we do? So that's where that relationship came, and that's why we ended up with a separate concept for information advantage.
Yes, sir. We have another question from, in this case, General Ellen Polakowski, who also serves as a distinguished member of the Board of Advisors of NSSA. Thank you for your question, Ellen. The question is, how best should the Space Force use the Space Development Agency as it strives to bring capabilities to address the threat?
So always scares me to death when General Polakowski asks me a question. Because, well, just like many, she's a whole lot smarter than me. So I always get afraid that she's going to ask me a question. She has asked me many questions that I have no answer to. In this one, I actually have an answer. So for General Polakowski, I hope you're doing well. I see you on Laura's Facebook all the time with the grandkids, and you look like you're loving life. That'll be me before too long. But in terms of the Space Development Agency, the way I look at the Space Development Agency is the Space Development Agency is best postured to try things that people have never done before, to try different business models that are structured. The things that they build should transition to the normal enterprise at some point. But the Space Development Agency is best postured to try new and different things, especially from a business perspective. So they have unique authorities, unique structures, but they're not the Space and Missile Systems Center in LA. They're not SMC. They're not the Rapid Capabilities Office. They're not that structure. They have a unique place to go after ideas in proliferated LEO that nobody else is pursuing, and to see if they work or they don't work. So it's always good to have a place that has a little bit higher risk tolerance than the normal process, where people will allow failure a little more readily in terms of a prototype capability in particular. So that's the role I see for the Space Development Agency. But again, the new administration will get a call, and how that plays out. And I don't know where that's going to come down either. We'll see how it plays out.
Yes, sir. Another NSSA Board of Advisors member, former NRO Director Jeff Harris, has asked a question. He said, looking forward, what does a Guardian's career look like, considering the necessary experiences and skill sets that they will need?
So what a great question. So it's a question I thought a lot about, and I haven't formulated a 1-minute answer to. So it's a fair question. So let me just pause and try to jumble a whole lot of thoughts together and come up with something coherent. So when I look at a future Guardian's career, I see a big change coming over what has been a traditional space professional's career. So the space professional, since I came in the space business as a captain. I wasn't in as a lieutenant. So since I was a captain for 35 years, has really been a checklist-oriented, structured approach to operating a capability in a benign environment. And so in many ways, that's why it wasn't horrible when we jammed space and missiles together, because the ICBM career field and the space career field actually, from an operations perspective, had a lot in common. We developed checklists, you follow the checklist, here's how you operate the system. The ICBM career field is that way, and one of the reasons we had to split it, because the space operations career field is now going a different way. And the direction that it's going that's different is you're operating in a tested environment all the time, where you're going to have different levels of responsibility, all right down to the operator, in order to deal with a threat that presents itself. And I think back as a wing commander, that was 20 years ago now when almost when I was a wing commander, well, 2006, so 15 years ago when I was a wing commander. I think about what would have happened in a threat environment and something happened on the Ops 4 on the 2nd Space Operations Squadron at Opera GPS, and they saw a threat. Here's what would happen. The airman on console would see the threat first. The airman would notify the NCO. The NCO would notify the captain. The captain would type up a report, call the squadron commander. The squadron would call the group commander. The group commander would call me. I would call the commander of Space Command. The commander of Space Command would then call on the Pentagon. The commander of the Pentagon, or whoever it was in the Pentagon, would wake up the chairman. The chairman would call the White House. They'd wake up the White House. We'd go all the way up to the President of the United States. Do you want us to do anything about it? And in reality, we had nothing to do about it anyway, so it was a waste of time. That can't happen when threats are real time. That structure has to go all the way down so that guardian now that is on the console that sees a threat has to have the authority and rules of engagement to quickly respond to it and do the things they have to do, just like a private in combat, just like anybody else. You have certain rules of engagement that you can do all by yourself without having to ask anybody else. And then you have echelons that quickly move to respond to the threats that are there. That'll be the difference of the Guardians in the Space Force in the future over what has been the last 30 years. And that's why it was so important to change the structure of space and missiles to divide those two, because now you have a real-time structure with real-time understanding of the domain, real-time understanding of the environment and the threat you have to deal with and respond to quickly. So I didn't squeeze it into 1 minute. It was probably about 3, but it's a really important question, Jeff. So thanks. I haven't got that question before, so I enjoyed trying to, come up with a quick answer, but it is just wholly different and will be for the next few years, decades.
Sir, you have noted today and in many previous examples that deterrence and defending freedom is a team sport. And along those lines, various friends and allies of the United States have expressed interest in acquiring advanced national security space capabilities from the United States. For example, the Japanese seek to acquire space situational awareness and missile early warning systems. The United Kingdom seeks to acquire communications and PNT constellations, and the Australians seek to field communications and intelligence capabilities. Are we working with these allies as a force multiplier, encouraging them to field complementary capabilities? And should the U.S. at some point consider ceding certain space mission areas to our allies?
So General Dickinson and General Raymond are doing a great job reaching out to the allies, and huge progress is being made. So don't take anything I'm about to say as criticism of that, because they're making huge progress. But we still have the wrong sight picture. Because we're asking ourselves, should we allow, what were the 3 countries in the question? Japan, the United Kingdom?
And the Australians, sir.
And the Australians. So let's think about those 3 countries for a second. Japan, the United Kingdom, and Australia. Do we let them operate any American weapon systems in other domains? Let's think about some of our most advanced capabilities. How about the F-35? The F-35, son of a gun. We will let them operate in unison with us, the F-35, which I would say is more advanced in many capabilities than almost any space system that we operate today. But space, though, is still special. So we won't let them operate these space capabilities in unison with us, but they want to. And General Raymond understands that. General Thompson understands it. General Dickinson understands it, and they're reaching out. Now we, in the Pentagon, we have to let those partnerships mature, and they should mature just like they have with everything else. Because I trust the Australians like my son. In fact, my son-in-law is Australian, so I guess I do trust him with my daughter. So I trust the Brits like my brother. I trust the Japanese. They're our closest partners. They're always with us. They're our greatest advantage. How is it that we're so slow to take advantage of their desire to partner with us? Now, we're never going to cede entire mission areas to them. We don't cede the entire mission area and all the other domains to them, but we partner with them. We leverage their capabilities, their people, their resources, their time, their talent, their brilliance in bringing capabilities forward and partnering them together. And then when we get into scrape, they're always there with us. And they're with us to operate with us. And they create more resilience and more power and more capabilities. And we just have to be more aggressive in doing that with space. So the fact that, again, it goes back to we don't treat space like the other domains right now. And we just have to get over that, Chris. We have to get past that. And the fact that we share F-35s, the newest, most advanced fighter in the United States Air Force with our closest allies, should tell you that we've already crossed that Rubicon. We just have to get over it and do it in space.
And sir, I'll ask you one more question, then I will ask you to provide any closing remarks that you might have. Sir, you've expressed frustration with the overclassification of certain space systems and capabilities. How does one balance, what's the right way of balancing the near-term desire for enhanced deterrence on the one hand with withholding certain capabilities that could help win a conflict in space on the other? Is a layered security architecture that is like an onion skin with multiple security layers of access categories and umbrella portfolios the best way to think about this challenge?
Sure. It's the same answer I gave a while ago. The layered approach is the right approach, because that's the approach we use in everything else. Space is one element of our deterrence. Our nuclear capabilities are an element of our deterrence. Our fifth generation aircraft are an element of our deterrence. Our 12 carrier strike groups are an element of our deterrence. Our B-2s are, and the B-2, and soon to be the B-21, is an acknowledged capability which has embedded in it a number of classified capabilities we don't talk about. But in space, we overclassify everything. And we don't come up with that structured, layered approach for how we deal with things. So we need to decide what we want to have to deter our adversaries, and then, God forbid, if conflict ever happens someday, what do we need in order to win in conflict with our adversaries? And those are two different things. We lump those things together as one and think they're the same thing. They're not. Deterrence does not happen in the classified world. Deterrence does not happen in the black. Deterrence happens in the white. We don't tell people where our nuclear submarines are. We don't tell people the full capabilities of that nuclear submarine, but we acknowledge that they exist, and that deters our adversaries. So it's just finding that layered approach. It's not releasing everything, but it's making sure that our adversaries know if they want to ever cross that line, it is not going to work. And in order to do that, you have to have a layered approach to deterrence, a layered approach to war-winning capabilities. It's just like every other domain.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you very much. Happy to have any closing comments you might have, sir, and then we'll wrap it up.
Well, I'll just say thanks very much for giving me an hour to talk about a subject I'm still passionate about, will always be passionate about. It's critical to the future security of this country. I think we've made great progress in the last decade, great progress in the last 5 years. I really do want to call out, President Trump, Vice President Pence from the last administration, but even more so, Congressman Rogers and Cooper, for really starting us down that path, because that path ended up in a really good place. And it was their energy, Republican and Democrat, working together, doing some really hard legwork to figure out what it would really take. That was remarkable. And as I always think back to watching them work together, and I think of watching Senator Inhofe and Senator Reid work together. It's amazing. People think our country is so divided, and we have challenges, don't get me wrong. But when we come together and we have a unifying challenge, and we do have a unifying challenge now in the threats we face overseas, we almost always do the right thing. And Congressman Rogers and Cooper did the right thing 5 years ago. I continue to watch us, when it comes right down to it, do the right thing. And I look forward to seeing what happens in the next few years, the next few decades. And I'm confident that we will figure out a way to deal with the threats that we face. Thanks for the time, Chris.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And for all those who participated today, we thank you for your time. General Hyten, keep up the great work, sir. And that's a wrap. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks.